Welcome everyone to another episode in the Perspective Drawing series. In this one, we will be taking a look at how to accurately draw shadows on objects in perspective. So when it comes to drawing shadows in perspective, there are three things which we need. Firstly, we need a light source. Next, we need the object that is exposed to the light. And finally, we need a surface in which the shadow of the object is projected. So here I'll start by drawing out a ground plane and then a line which is going to be the object exposed to the light. And we will look at some more objects soon, but for now, let's keep this simple and start with a line like this. Now I need to add my light source, which can be placed anywhere around the object. I will place this here, and now I have the three things we need to start drawing in a shadow. The first step is to work out the direction of the shadow, and to do this I firstly need to find the point at which both the light source and the object come in contact with the ground plane. Now our line is already on this ground plane, but the light source is up here, so I will project a line down to a point on the ground plane as well. Now from the bottom of this, I take a line through the bottom of the object and extend this like so. This gives me the direction for the shadow relative to the position of the light source. Now I take a line from the light source itself to the top of the object and continue this until it meets the directional line that I had just drawn. I'll go ahead and shade this in, and I have successfully drawn a shadow in perspective. Now let's take a look at how to draw some more shadows, but let's not just use a line this time. Instead, for the object, let's draw what could be the sides of a box. So here I'll start by drawing out the ground plane and the object, and then I'll add a light source. This flat ground plane follows the same perspective as the side of the box I had drawn. So now I can start to draw the shadow, and to do this I approach it the same way as before. I draw a line down from the light source to the ground plane, and from that point I take a line through the bottom corners of the object and extend them further, defining the direction of the shadow. Now I can draw a line from the light source through the top corners of the object and continue these until they meet the directional lines, defining the length of the shadow. I now connect these lines at those points and shade in this shadow. So before we move on, let me discuss the position of the light source, because you might have guessed already, if I change the location for where the light is coming from, then the shadow will change as well. Here is the same example I had just shown you, except the light source has changed its position, and as a result the shadow projecting from the object has changed. The same would happen if the object had changed position as well. I also want to point out that the further away the light source is from the object, the less sharp the edges of the shadow will be. Now let's take a look at projecting some shadows from more irregular shapes. Again, I'll start by drawing the ground plane, and then I'll draw out a rectangle so that I can draw a more irregular shape within this. I divide up the rectangle like so to help me draw this curved shape. I'll also cut out a rectangular section. Now I have drawn this shape within a rectangle, and that's important, not only because it helps me draw more complex shapes, but because I will have to project some lines down from this rectangle in order to draw the shadow for this curved shape. Now I need to position the light source. So I have this shape drawn within this rectangle, and as I said, this is important because I'm going to ignore the irregular shape for a moment and instead do the same as I usually do with this rectangle. I take the light source down to the ground plane and then some lines from this point through each of the bottom corners of the rectangle. This gives me the direction of the shadow, and now I take some lines from the light source through the top corners of the rectangle and extend these until they meet the directional lines. Now this would be the outline of the shadow for just this rectangle, but obviously we have this shape within it, and so what I do here is divide this up the same way as I have divided up the rectangle for the irregular shape. I can then draw some lines from the light source through these key points on the original irregular shape and project them down to the shadow here. These points will help me draw in that curve for the shadow as well. Now I need to draw in that cutout, and the same method is applied. I take some lines through the key points and project them to the shadow so that I can draw in this rectangular cutout. Once this is done, I shade this in and I have added a shadow to this irregular shape. So now let's take a look at drawing shadows on some three-dimensional forms. Here I will draw out my ground plane and then a box that will be the object I will draw a shadow for. I now need to position a light source. The first step, as always, is to project a line down from the light source to the ground plane that our object is on, and now I need to define the direction of the shadow by extending some lines through and past the bottom corners of the box. I only do this on the corners that are relevant though. Obviously, from looking at where the light source is placed near the object, I know that the shadow will be over on this side. I then take some lines down from the light source through and past the top corners of the box until they meet those directional lines. This helps me find the key points of the shadow, and I could go ahead and connect these now because I know that the outline of the shadow will follow the same perspective as the box, but for this demonstration I'll also project a line through this corner of the box which will give me that key point as well, and I can now connect these points and shade in this shadow. Here I will draw a cylinder for the object and project a shadow from this. So I set this up the same as before. I draw in the ground plane and then a cylinder, and for this example I'll place this light source here. So I have this cylinder, and you might be wondering how to go about drawing in the shadows for these more curved objects. I'll start by drawing in that line down from the light source to the ground plane, and then what I will do is I'm going to add some vertical lines like this around the side of the cylinder, and I'm doing this on the side where I know the shadow will be. Once I have these lines, I can do the same as before and draw in some directional lines through each of these. I now take some lines from the light source above through the top of these vertical lines and extend them until they meet the directional lines. You'll notice that it creates these points which I can now connect with a curved line, giving me the outline for the shadow. So overall it's a case of observing the object you want to add shadows to and figuring out a simple way for you to project key points down from it onto the surface in which the shadow is projected. And again, this is all relative to the position of the light source. I will be doing another episode on shadows, so I will cover more there, but I hope this was a good introduction for you. With that being said, I'll see you in the next one. If you enjoyed the content I create, then do consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You will gain access to exclusive tutorials, study documents, process papers, real-time drawing footage and more. Plus you will also be supporting me in a more personal way. Other than that, thank you for watching this video and I'll see you soon.